This is part one of two shows I did with JJ Zachariason. In today's episode, we go over JJ McCarthy, Caleb Williams, Bears fans in general, his feud with RG3, and talk about Mike Williams to the Jets, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson to the Steelers, the fallout, how the Chargers offense now looks, what they might be doing. So a ton of NFL specific and only content coming at you. One of my favorite people in the world to talk NFL with is JJ, so I hope you really enjoy that. Be on the lookout for part two, where we talk a little bit more about the best quarterback prospects of all time, the Challenge Season 40 cast. If you're into that kind of thing, that'll be at the back end of number two, and just some content stuff like show guides, behind the scenes of podcasting and video work, that kind of thing. So tune into both episodes, but really enjoy this one. Smash the like while you're here, all right? Let's go!
The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Underdog Fantasy. Code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy right now will get you a first-time deposit match of up to $100, and there are some pretty big NFL best ball drafts going on, but there's more beyond NFL. You can get yourself into Pick'em, MLB best ball drafts, PGA best ball drafts, which I've been covering a ton on Mayo Media Network and on the Pat Mayo Experience podcast. But I wanted to bring in now fellow Underdog sponsored host, NFL genius, if I must say, lateround.com it's at late round QB. JJ Zachariason, what's up, man?
It is still at late round QB. I didn't change to like at late round or anything like that. I feel like the late round, I can't get away from it at this point. That's just my handle. You know, I can't shift it now.
No, and everyone should go get the prospect guide that's out right now. I want to emphasize that off the top, lateround.com. I've been going through all the profiles. I'm like, oh yeah, I should just make a note to read this every year, especially before the draft, so I actually know who's who.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. It's one of those things where like I put together, and this is my third year doing it, but I put it together and I'm like, I'm also doing it selfishly so I can go on shows. And you know what? I don't even need a show sheet for this show because I can just go on and talk about these prospects because I wrote the profiles of these guys.
Well, we'll talk about the show sheet thing here, maybe towards it. You can always hit the time codes, figure out the topic that you want to jump to. We're going to start with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, I suppose, from that matter. So he goes to Pittsburgh. You're a Steelers fan. Obviously you want Justin Fields to start over Russell Wilson. I have a sense that it's going to be Russell Wilson starting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to too. I think that they didn't really lie to him when they said that he's the starter and they're going to bring Justin Fields in to back him up and develop and see what happens. I think that from like a team building, the way that I've sort of viewed this with Pittsburgh from like a team building standpoint is they're a team that never will rebuild. We know that the Steelers just don't rebuild. They'll go 9-8 and they'll be satisfied enough going 9-8. They'll never have a high enough pick to get a true, new franchise quarterback, or their options are to luck into that option. Right. And so with Pittsburgh, where they're at right now, decent defense, obviously some pieces on the defensive side, even some pieces on the offensive side. The offensive line has gotten a decent bit better than it was a few years ago, even towards like the end of Ben's career. And so what do? Well, you know that your passing attack isn't going to be very strong, like inherently. And so they bring in Arthur Smith. And I don't like the hire from the standpoint of, this is not how you really should build a franchise, and like you should just go through a rebuild and don't worry about winning right now. But if you're going to have problems at the quarterback position and problems through the air, you might as well get a guy where at the very least we feel pretty good about Arthur Smith's ability to create a solid run game. Like we can trash him all we want, but his efficiency and what we've seen from his offenses on the ground has actually been pretty strong. And so I do think that Arthur Smith, within the context of what the Steelers are trying to do, is fine enough. And then I think what they're really trying to do is recreate the Tennessee Titans offense from 2019 or so when Arthur Smith was offensive coordinator there. Ryan Tannehill comes back, rejuvenates his career, revitalizes it, becomes, an almost, I don't remember if he made the Pro Bowl or not, but like a Pro Bowl-ish type quarterback there from an efficiency standpoint. You have the alpha receiver, A.J. Brown, then George Pickens, now obviously A.J. Brown, a better player, but you have the same sort of setup as you did with Tennessee. And Russell Wilson works within this offense because he can run play action. He can get the ball down the field, which is what they're going to want to do. And so I understand it like from that perspective. Do I think it's going to be ultra effective? No, of course not. Like I'd be pretty surprised if the Steelers at the end of the year were top half in the league in offensive touchdowns scored, right? But I do think that it's an upgrade from where they were last season.
I think it's interesting with Wilson too, just based on the Arthur Smith, I don't want to say problem, but what he's going to bring to the table here. And maybe a lot of the limitations that we saw in the Atlanta offense were merely because of the quarterback play, be it Heineke or Desmond Ridder, that when we saw Tannehill be able to succeed in this offense, it was a lot of play action. It was a lot of deep throws down the field. Maybe Heineke and Ridder just weren't cut out for that. Or maybe even it was the personnel. Maybe, a crisp route runner like Drake London is someone that, maybe isn't just running flies down the field the entire time, or maybe the Steelers do have the personnel to do that. Maybe that's why you ship off a Deontay Johnson, who's more of that crisp route runner, not someone who's just going to blow you by on the outside and get himself open. If there's one thing that we saw from Russell Wilson last year with Denver, dude can throw a screen pass, that he can do, and he can still just chuck it down the field. Like his intermediate throwing is just absolutely horrendous. They didn't even ask him to do it by the end of the year. But I could see this offense mimicking a lot of what we saw in Denver, but actually be a bit more efficient on the ground.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like I think it's also probably a little premature. Like I think there's a little bit of an anchoring bias with Russ, with what he did that first year with Nathaniel Hackett there and how bad that team just generally was. And then last year, he wasn't good, but it was an improvement over the year prior, with Sean Payton. And so, I think that there's, I'm not calling Russell Wilson even a top, 15, 20 starter in the league per se, but I think that people who didn't see the Steelers last year enough, the quarterback play was beyond horrendous. Like Kenny Pickett was really, really bad. And then them, cycling through and going to Mason Rudolph, and everyone, a lot of people in Pittsburgh were like excited about Mason Rudolph, but a lot of that was driven by like touchdown to int ratio and stuff like that just doesn't matter that much. Like he wasn't the answer. And so I'm at least cautiously optimistic from the standpoint of things will be better. I don't think it's going to be like significantly better, and all of a sudden they're again like a top half offense in the league. Could they rank like 20th or 21st in touchdown scored this year? I think that's a possibility. Yeah, and I would expect them to continue to build in that wide receiver room. People have been like, there's been like rumors out there. You know how there's always like just insane rumors with anything, but there's been rumors of like them trading for Justin Jefferson and just like these crazy things. Like the Mike Williams stuff was, and this is what we call in the business a segue, because I'm sure that we'll be talking about Mike Williams eventually. But the Mike Williams connection to Pittsburgh, because he visited with them or was talking to them or something, that makes a lot of sense. Arthur Smith, if you look at what he likes to do offensively, he loves big-bodied wide receivers. They drafted Drake London, even Mac Hollins, who played on the outside with Drake London, a really, really big wide receiver. In Tennessee, they had Corey Davis and AJ Brown. Mike Williams made a lot of sense for what they want to do offensively, but this is not an offense that's going to prioritize wide receiver. I think that the Steelers are going to do the Steelers thing, get a second or third round wide receiver in a deep wide receiver class, and kind of see what they can what they can get out of that player and kind of go from there.
Out of the prospects that you ended up writing up, like who makes sense in that range, do you think, for the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Who makes sense to me versus who makes sense for them. I think that from their perspective, I could see them liking a guy like Xavier Legette, who's just this massive DK Metcalf type body, who though does not have a DK Metcalf type profile. He comps more to like a Jonathan Mingo, Hakeem Butler, JJ Arcega-Whiteside type player. And I know that,
so he's going to be terrible.
Right, exactly. Right. Like he has a lot of red flags to his profile, but I could see Pittsburgh wanting to go in sort of like that archetype direction. Maybe a Jalen Polk, he's a little bit thinner, but he's at least got a little bit of size. Maybe going that direction in round 2. But I wouldn't see them going with like, a Ricky Pearsall or like a Roman Wilson or something like that, who are more technicians. I think they're going to go after more of the bigger bodied player.
Do you think that there would be a point of the season if the offense is pretty stagnant with Russell Wilson, that I do think that we'll see Fields, obviously, unless Russell Wilson plays absolutely lights out, that the offense can evolve a little bit to what we've talked about. You can run your play action, you can run these deep routes down the field, you can emphasize efficient running, but if you inject Fields into an offense like that and just give him the option, or at least the play call the option, of him taking off at the same time too, that I feel like this could be, I don't want to say a dynamic offense, but it would really enhance its upside. I think if you let Fields in there, if he could grasp the offense and really utilize his legs, where Wilson can still kind of do that, but not in the same like realm that Justin Fields still can.
Yeah, and the one thing that I think is interesting too, everyone's making a big deal about what the market was doing with Justin Fields and how teams didn't really seem to want Justin Fields. Some of that has to do with the fact that teams have invested in this core at wide receiver, and they have this scheme that they want to run, and Justin Fields just doesn't fit that. But if you look at what Pittsburgh's doing, look at they literally only have George Pickens right now that anyone would be concerned about, which is fine. You can still use it. Like you're not gonna want to invest in wide receiver, for instance, if you have Justin Fields running that offense, right? And I'm not saying that you do what the Bears did to him a couple years ago, but look at what they did last year. They just get DJ Moore. They could function at a reasonable level. And I think that's what you could see with Pittsburgh too, and why Justin Fields makes sense in that environment. Not only that, I think the coaching staff is just a good staff for Fields to just develop as well. So yeah, I mean, like the dynamic ability of Justin Fields makes sense within this offense for sure. I think, and obviously from a fantasy perspective, anytime Justin Fields is playing, he's going to be basically a QB1 in fantasy.
Oh, 100%. And when it comes to what the compensation was for him in terms of, the 6th round pick conditional, maybe moves up to a 4th, whatever it might be. And then the headline is Kenny Pickett got traded for more than the Steelers had to trade for Justin Fields. It's a different scenario, though, because I don't think that anyone really disagrees that Fields isn't good enough to be a starter in the NFL. I just think, Bears fans are, they're tilted at the moment. It's a really weird hill to die on that, hey, I want to keep Justin Fields and not draft Caleb Williams. Now, maybe Caleb Williams ends up sucking. That's definitely in the realm of possibility. We've seen enough number 1 picks just not be good in quarterbacks taken at the very top of the draft. But I think when you're assessing Justin Fields, could you win a Super Bowl with Justin Fields? Probably not. Maybe you could with the absolute right team around him in the right year. But on the whole, he's not going to take a really shitty team and make them really good. And that's really what it boils down to. So if you're a team who's trying to trade for him and you end up with a 6th round pick, good situation, and they save a bunch of money with Russ on his super cheap deal, that they can bring him in to test these waters, that it's going to be a big cap hit, especially if they pick up the 5th year. And then what if you don't know? What if you're on the fence again next time around and you owe Justin Fields all this money and you end up paying him like the Giants paid Daniel Jones? That's the last spot that you ever want to be in, that you don't know if this is the guy, but you have to give him a multi-year deal anyway for a bunch of money. And then he's just by default your quarterback, even if he's not good.
Right, exactly. Like teams don't want to invite quarterback purgatory just to do it. There's plenty of teams out there that Justin Fields would be an upgrade over their quarterback situation, right? Look at Denver right now, or look at New England right now. There are teams out there that could use Justin Fields, but they're looking further than just what's going to happen in 2024. Because, when you're going, the way that I've always told people because I have Bears fan friends and stuff who are like, I can't believe they're doing Justin Fields so dirty and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, I understand you have this weird infatuation with Justin Fields, and Bears fans aren't used to average quarterback play. And that's why you're feeling the way that you're feeling right now. The crazy thing is Caleb Williams could just be an above average quarterback, and they'll name a building after Caleb Williams in Chicago, even if he's just an above average quarterback. But the probability, what would you say? It's like an 80% chance that Caleb Williams is just as good as Justin Fields, right? Maybe even more than that, just from a projection standpoint and from a probability standpoint. And then just think about the upside then. There's just so much more upside then. And then there's the rookie contract piece, with Caleb Williams. It's very obvious to go in that direction, but then it's understandable why teams wouldn't want to invite quarterback purgatory by taking out Justin Fields too.
It's funny because I think Trevor Lawrence kind of falls into this bucket as well, that if Lawrence didn't have the year that he had last year, where he rallied the Jags to make the playoffs and they win a playoff game with an epic comeback against the Chargers, I think we're having very similar conversations about Trevor Lawrence right now. But because he had that one season, that was enough for people oh, see, he can do it. He was the number 1 pick. He has all this upside. But frankly, when you watch Trevor Lawrence, he's not that good.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely at least a lot of question marks still with Trevor Lawrence. We cannot place him in a bucket of he's definitively a starter forever in this league. He'll be playing until he's 37 years old as a starter. But I do think Jacksonville's going to end up keeping him around because there's enough there / the He's obviously has been better than a guy like Fields. And so, yeah, but they are, again, like that's inviting quarterback purgatory a little bit. And do you really want to do that with your franchise?
Yeah, you're just really hoping that he ends up leveling up at some point. And like I said,
Right.
he's been good, but not great. But that's
Exactly.
also the situation where do you really want to shell out full top dollar for a
Right.
quarterback whose peak might be like the 9th best quarterback in football? Now, maybe he breaks through that and ends up getting way better. But if that's like your upside, chances are your team's not going to go anywhere.
Right. Or at least consistently.
Yeah. So Mike Williams ends up going to the Jets. 1 year, $15 million to pair with Garrett Wilson on the outside. We actually did a live reaction show to this when Cust went all bonkers. And I mean, for years, he's been saying how much he hates Mike Williams, and now he has Mike Williams, so he's really trying to reckon with this. But it's a good signing, I think.
Yeah.
As long as like he's on the field, I think the biggest people just seem to be overlooking this, especially, I mean, Jets fans kind of have to, but even like national media people who are now like, oh yeah, well the Jets are going to have this super strong defense and their offense can be ultra dynamic right now. What are the chances that Aaron Rodgers is like an elite quarterback at age 40 coming off an Achilles tear?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a big question mark, right?
But
I do think
no one's asking that question. Everyone's just like, oh yeah, Aaron Rodgers, 4-time MVP, he's great. Don't worry about him.
Right. And when we've seen like valleys of Aaron Rodgers' career pre MVP back-to-back seasons, right? Like he was not that great from like 2016. He wasn't bad. Maybe he was like Trevor Lawrence-esque from like 2016 until he had that first MVP season, or the one of the two of the back-to-back. But the Mike Williams signing makes plenty of sense. They had a very glaring hole there at wide receiver 2. He can play the perimeter. It allows Garrett Wilson to move inside, outside. I think Garrett Wilson is set up very, very well to see a ton of volume. Unfortunately, best ball drafters right now are very much, still in on Garrett Wilson. He's like a 1-2 turn type player, early second round kind of player, which is basically where he was at last year for the most part. Maybe he was more in the first last year in a wide receiver heavy format, but you're kind of hoping that you would get somewhat of a discount because of all the things that we're talking about with Aaron Rodgers, and people would forget about how hyped we were about Garrett Wilson. And then, Wilson comes through with, in a really crappy situation. He was fine, but it wasn't a great fantasy season for Wilson because of the crappy situation. And so you were hoping for a more, depressed price than what we're seeing right now, but it's looking pretty good for Garrett Wilson though on a projections front. Like I think he is a top 10 wide receiver projection wise right now. And the Mike Williams thing, I don't think hurts him that much because they needed a wide receiver too. There's plenty of target share up for grab there.
Yeah, I would even make the case that it probably helps him out a little bit because no one was really putting any respect on Alan Lazard's name anymore.
Yeah.
Who's their wide receiver 3 right now? Xavier, whatever the fuck his name is.
It would, hang on, I actually now need to. Oh yeah, it's Xavier Gibson.
Great. So your return specialist guy, like low rent Dante Hall, is going to be your third wide receiver. That never really works out well.
Yeah, that's not great.
So do you think the Jets are going to be any good?
It's tough. It's a tough conference in general. Tough division too, obviously with Miami and Buffalo. I think they'll probably be competitive. Yeah, I mean, I think that they'll probably at least be in the playoff hunt, late in the season. But I don't want to sit here and say like I think Robert Saleh has gotten off pretty easy based on what they've done and how they've performed. And I don't really trust Hackett that much. So I'll say maybe a 10-win season, fringe wild card.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it would probably have to do with their defense, which was really good last year. But I always wonder, and I mean, you dig into this stuff far more than I do, so you might actually have an answer, or you haven't looked at it, and you probably wouldn't even try to speculate on it. But sometimes we see that, in my theory at least, that we have these quote-unquote good defenses, and they're always attached to these really crappy offenses. What are the chances that maybe the other team isn't trying to do the craziest things possible against that defense, knowing that the other offense is just never going to score on you?
Well, I also think there's just a natural volatility to defensive. I know this factually, that if you look at like EPA, expected points added, and you look at pass defense, rush defense, pass offense, rush offense, the thing that is stickiest most year over year by far is passing offense. And the reason for that is because the quarterback usually stays with the team if he's good year over year. And so if that quarterback is there year over year, you're going to see comparable numbers, comparable efficiency, and there is that stability there. Defense, though, in general, you just see a lot of volatility. I mean, like you can have an elite defense across 17 games, and the very next season, that defense just falls off based on just general regression, right? Like there are things that like it's just not easy for an elite defense to stay elite year over year. So I think that also is in play with the Jets too.
Yeah, it's almost one of the cases that I made for Minnesota last year. Obviously, Kirk Cousins going down doesn't help matters in that front, but they were the worst defense. It's like, well, it's hard to statistically be the same worst defense year over year.
Oh yeah.
So just bringing in Brian Flores and then natural regression upwards, all of a sudden you're going to be a whole lot better defensively. And then it's funny because it hit like mid-season for them, and then all of a sudden they were just an awesome defense for like 4 weeks, and then it shifted back again. It's funny because it almost completely coincided with like Dobbs starting to play really shitty, that their defense just couldn't hold up anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you can do that same exercise with offenses. I do it in my draft guide every year where I'm just looking at like you can literally just look at offensive touchdowns. And if a team really overperformed in the offensive touchdown column, they just scored a whole lot of touchdowns one year, they're not going to score as many touchdowns the next year. It doesn't matter what they did personnel wise. The odds of it happening are very low because regression's real and things just went right from a conversion standpoint the year before. And then the same thing holds true when offenses are really, really poor in the touchdown column. You can expect regression. It should come out in projections when you're doing projections, but to someone who's not building projections, you can just look at that at a very high level and kind of come to some conclusions.
Now that Williams is gone from the Chargers, Keenan Allen is now in Chicago. You got like Quentin Johnson, Jalen Guyton, Semi is there right now. They probably don't even bring back Parham because they signed Will Disley. Harbaugh is the coach. What is going, like, is this offense going to be legitimately bad, or is Harbaugh just going to be like, we're running the ball 90% of the time and don't worry about it?
Yeah, the crazy thing to me, like, I think they're in play to get a wide receiver 5th overall in the draft because you're probably going to have Malik Neighbors sitting there if if they want to go wide receiver. But I think a lot of people, like if you look at any mock right now, 90% of them are going to say that they're getting Malik Neighbors or whoever the wide receiver 2 is to that individual analyst, maybe Roma Dunze, because they're going to say that Marvin Harrison Jr. would go to Arizona. Maybe Arizona trades out and JJ McCarthy's in there now in the top 4. You get 4 quarterbacks going in the top 4, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. goes to LA. Regardless, there's always a wide receiver mocked to LA. But with Greg Roman there, I just don't think they're going to prioritize wide receiver. I think it's possible, of course, that they get one of these elite wideouts. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying they don't necessarily have to, or they probably don't have the inclination to force a wide receiver pick there because wide receiver just doesn't matter that much in this offense. Like period. Like they're going to run the ball heavily. They're going to use their tight end a pretty good bit. Whoever that ends up being, a lot of people right now it's Hayden Hurst, which I don't know if it'll end up being Hayden Hurst, or they'll probably at least get something in the draft. But some people were even mocking Brock Bowers there a little bit earlier in the offseason. I think that the Chargers are just clearly in rebuild mode right now, and I would, if I were them, I would actually just trade back out of that spot, especially if no one trades up in the top 4 to get JJ McCarthy, because that some team is going to be quarterback needy and will force that, at the 105. But right now, yeah, I mean, it's Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston as their top 2 wide receivers. Do I expect them to go into the season with these 2 guys? Not necessarily. Could it happen? Yeah, I actually do think it could happen, just given this Greg Roman offense and how run heavy it's bound to be.
So let's talk JJ McCarthy for a second, because there's a very interesting scenario shaping up at number 4, and maybe the Chargers can't really do anything until they see what happens with the Cardinals at that pick. Like, I think a lot of people just are thinking that it's probably Minnesota that's going to trade up to get JJ McCarthy. Would you trade up for JJ McCarthy? Like, coming out, like, I admittedly do not watch very much college football, if any, but it didn't seem like he was a guy that anyone was talking about to be a top first round quarterback, let alone a top 10 quarterback, let alone a top 5 quarterback. But now here we are. Is it that, the advanced scouting has really worked out? Is it like, what is it with him that he just got this boost, this propulsion over the past 2 months?
Yeah. I mean, I think that teams were more into him probably than the public thought, just in general. A lot of people will equate, a low volume. And for the record, like I don't prospect quarterback the way that I prospect running back and wide receiver and even tight end. So like quarterback is very much a semi crapshoot. You got to be able to know what's going on between the ears with these guys because it's a more cerebral position to play. Like it matters, their attitude towards the game and their prep towards the game, all that kind of stuff. It does matter more at the quarterback position, which is why I think there are just so many busts, and the NFL and the league get it wrong so frequently. With that being said, I mean, you look at what he did at the combine, where he basically was throwing the ball as far and as hard as any other quarterback that was there. He has decent athleticism. I think a lot of people are looking at how run heavy that Harbaugh team was in Michigan, and they're equating that to JJ McCarthy not being good, but the running game was just very, very strong. And McCarthy, when he was called upon, really clutch, did really well on third downs, and did really well against good competition. I mean, when you look at his splits against good competition and against poorer competition, you don't really see a difference between the two. And so I think a lot of people look at those types of things and they look at his like sack avoidance and such, and they say this could be a legit franchise signal caller. And then on top of that, I think he interviews really well. Like I think he just has that feel that teams want out of a franchise quarterback.
I like the way, and maybe this is a very poor read on the entire situation, but to me, based on the way that people talk about him, what his college profile was, he just sounds like Brock Purdy, but with a lot of more pedigree coming out.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more from a tools perspective with McCarthy than Purdy. Purdy still has like, some arm strength concerns and stuff like that. And like really like how Purdy's performed, I'm thinking of him just more as a player versus him in the Shanahan system, right? Like him in the Shanahan system has been great. I think Brock Purdy's good, but then obviously enhanced by the situation that he's been in. Like anyone who says otherwise is being silly. And so with JJ McCarthy, you just have better tools. Like you have better arm strength, better size, more athleticism than Brock Purdy, and more of that unknown. Like I'm not saying that McCarthy is necessarily like a must get, but I do at least kind of understand why teams are becoming more enamored, or from a perception standpoint, becoming more enamored, because there are some things that he brings to the table that you might not be able to find elsewhere.
And with the Jaden Daniels Drake May situation at 2 and 3 with Washington and New England right now, granted if they both keep the pick, which I assume that they will, like, do you think McCarthy's closer to those guys, or are those guys closer to Caleb Williams? Like, do you have a differentiation between them, or is it just flipping a coin with a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on a lot of the quarterback stuff, especially because I'm projecting mostly for fantasy, and like Jaden Daniels has that like Justin Fields rushing upside. So I'm like, hell yeah, I'm interested in Jaden Daniels. It's gonna be like crazy interesting. But then at the same time, Jaden Daniels has the Justin Fields problem too of the taking too many sacks, and his pressure to sack rate is very poor, which you don't like to see. And then Drake May is just sort of like the toolsy guy, like the Justin Herbert type prospect coming out, where, you could see the upside because he has the arm, he has the grit and the mentality to play QB1 and be a franchise quarterback. But yeah, I mean, like I don't necessarily, because of what other smart people are saying about this quarterback class, I don't necessarily like group McCarthy with those guys, but I do think that McCarthy is probably better than a lot of the haters believe out there.
Yeah, like how much of it, like the negative press that he gets, obviously situation was one thing, or the fact that he just won a national championship and plays at Michigan, and people don't like Michigan, people don't like John Harbaugh, people don't like college teams that win, essentially, unless it's Florida Tim Tebow, and then as soon as he turns pro, it's like, this guy fucking sucks, and yeah, they were kind of right about that. And that would go back to my one thing that college sports should add, now that they can most definitely pay people, is that you should have one legacy player be allowed on your team at all times. So Tim Tebow could just always be the quarterback at Florida if they wanted
I like
to.
that. Yeah, Tom Brady in Michigan, that'd be fun.
Yeah, but I mean, Brady can go play in the NFL. It's great. It's good for those like tweener quarterbacks who just are not cut out.
I got you. Like a Chris Leak or something like that, who just random guys who were really good in college but couldn't make the transition to pro.
Yeah, who was the guy at Oklahoma? I'm pretty sure he won the Heisman. White.
Oh, Jason White.
Jason White. Yeah, like he could be there at like 48 playing still.
Yeah. No, I dig that. I don't think JJ McCarthy's that though. No, I mean, I do think that a lot of the backlash with McCarthy right now is based on the fact that they won the national championship. People think that he's just getting hype and steam because of the national championship win. And he wasn't the face of that team per se. I mean, the team, again, they had a really good run game. Blake Corum was great. but JJ McCarthy did what he had to do. Like that's the thing that I get irritated with, is that like you can't hate the dude for doing and performing exactly how he needed to perform to win the national championship. It wasn't like they just won their conference and they weren't very, they won the national championship by running the offense that they ran, and he ran that offense very effectively. So I think you just need to look a little bit deeper. And yeah, you have to do a little bit of projecting for sure. But I think that you have to then, from our perspective as like fantasy players and such, like we have to then look at what teams are saying with their money, with draft capital, and say, okay, if Minnesota uses 2 firsts to trade up, I mean, more than 2 firsts, right? Because they traded to get that 2nd first. So if Minnesota is using that package to trade up and get JJ McCarthy, great situation in Minnesota. You got great wide receivers there, great pass catchers, a really good coaching infrastructure. Yeah, you probably should not just dismiss JJ McCarthy because he played in a run-heavy offense at Michigan. I think there's probably going to be something there.
So additionally, I just need you to try to talk this through with me, because Feinberg's having like panic attacks every day, and even on the show and text threads and DMs about the Chargers doing. He's really like, I think he's searching Justin Herbert on Twitter, and then anyone who says that Justin Herbert is going to be traded or anything like that, that he's like yelling at them online. This is how he's coping with the fact that I don't think it's going to happen. But like, is there any chance that they part ways with Herbert for a huge package and get one of these other quarterbacks?
So I've thought about that for sure, but I don't think it's reasonable to think, because Harbaugh went to LA because Justin Herbert was there. Now, maybe he went to LA because Justin Herbert was there and he knew that he could get a great package for Justin Herbert. But I think that he went to LA knowing that Justin Herbert was there. I don't think you give up on Justin Herbert and you give up on that known entity. You build around him, and you build an offense that, again, this is going to be another offense, the Chargers offense, that's predicated on running the ball a lot more than the Arthur Smith offense and getting the ball down the field. That's why I think LA, yes, they could go with a wide receiver at 5, but there's enough like deep threat type guys in this class that you might be able to get in round 2 that they might be more inclined to go with to fit this offense and this style a little bit more.
Yeah, what they need to do is actually draft like the guy who may not be the fastest or run the best routes and cut his hands off after they draft him and give them to Quentin Johnson. And then they could just merge and become a super wide receiver.
There you go. Perfect. I like that idea.
Or try to get him like in Little Giants when they put all the stickum on that guy's hands. Maybe they could do that for Quentin Johnson. Something with Quentin Johnson after you spent all that draft capital on him for a guy who can't catch.
Yeah, he's just running down the field with his hands stuck to his jersey, like in the Little Giants.
Yeah, it might actually be more effective for Quentin Johnson based on what I've seen from him so far. So hopefully for the Chargers' sake, he can bounce back a little bit. So lateround.com, you can get the prospect guide that you've written up already. Like I said, I've been perusing it. I've been trying to do a deep dive on some of these mid-round running backs, mid-round wide receivers, even some of the later tight ends, just to get a sense of where teams may go and which players that I should have identified for when it happens. Then I jump into the best ball drafts and I'm like, all right, these are guys I can take late. It's a part of team stacks or one-offs, whatever it might be. So I don't want to step on that. However, I do want to step on it a little bit. If there are guys in the 3rd to 5th round who end up going, wide receiver wise, running back wise, and obviously this is all going to be team dependent on where they go. But players that you've identified who might not right now have all of that draft capital or draft buzz, but if they get drafted to the right team, you become very interested all of a sudden. I don't want to say like this year's Puka, but someone who could potentially fill that role on a team.
Yeah, I mean, I think one guy, wide receiver, Jermaine Burton, who it's very odd that he doesn't have a bad production profile. So a lot of, the models that I work with, they're mathematical, they're analytical. So I'm looking at things like age-adjusted college production. I have a metric called breakout score that I look at that looks at how young a player was when he hit certain yards per team pass attempt thresholds. It's very, very nerdy stuff. The bottom line is Jermaine Burton has a decent production profile, age-adjusted production profile. He played at 2 very, very good programs. He finished at Alabama. He's an Alabama wide receiver. Since when do Alabama wide receivers who had decent production not get much steam in the draft community? Like, it's very weird to me that Burton is not getting more love. But Burton is someone who, honestly, like the Chargers could go after, because he's a guy who can stretch the field. He's someone who can make splash plays. And I think that he's ready to perform and play right away. So I like Burton. Another guy who you can get late is Jalen McMillan. I've made this comp before on a show, and it was more of just like me kind of testing the waters. Like, I don't know if I necessarily like feel this to my core, but there's this group of Washington wide receivers coming out this year, and Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. It reminds me a whole lot of when I was doing the research on these guys. Kind of reminds me of USC when they had Michael Pittman, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown all in the same squad. Jalen McMillan is the Amon-Ra St. Brown of the group, where he is very much a slot guy. Will probably play a very high percentage of his route and run a high percentage of his routes from the slot. But one of his comps was Amon-Ra St. Brown through the model. That's all analytical, one of his top 3 comps. And so, if he can find a spot where I think we'd all agree, like Amon-Ra St. Brown's a really, really good player, like a phenomenal player, but he also is in an environment where he can work the slot and really thrive and see high volumes of touches because, he's in that area of the field and there's not that much else going on necessarily in Detroit. I know they have Sam Laporta now, but like they haven't had a true complement to him because Jamison Williams hasn't panned out yet. And I think that if Jalen McMillan finds a spot where maybe there's only one alpha and then he can kind of play slot and 3 wide sets, I'm interested in him. I think that when you look at what he did at Washington, everyone's really high on Rome Odunze for good reason. I like Rome Odunze too. But 2 years ago in 2022, the 2022 season, Jalen McMillan had pretty comparable numbers to Rome Odunze in that same offense. Jalen Polk was sort of the odd man out from a production standpoint. And then in 2023, Jalen McMillan was hurt for a lot of the season. Jalen Polk sort of rose, and he has more of the prototypical outside receiver build. And so he's more of like the second round, projected draft capital guy at this point. But Jalen McMillan, like, had pretty good age-adjusted production when you consider the environment that he was in and the fact that he did compete, with a guy like Rome Odunze. So he's another wide receiver I'd pay attention to. And then at running back, I'll give you 2 of them. I'll give you 3 of them. Okay. 3 running backs. Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State. He's kind of a do-it-all back. Doesn't necessarily, he's not like an uber athlete or anything like that, but he comped very closely to both James Robinson and Tyler Algier. So I think that he could be a day 3, every down back who in Dynasty you could draft in the 4th round of your rookie drafts and then flip him after year 1 because the team probably isn't going to want to invest as him as their RB1, more than likely, because that's, most teams are only going to invest like the truly supremely gifted running backs, from a team build standpoint. So Isaiah Davis would be one. Really like Dylan Laube out of New Hampshire. He is, he has one of the metrics that I use for running backs is best season reception share. He has the best reception share that the model has ever seen. It goes back to 2011, better than Christian McCaffrey's reception share, better than Aaron Jones, who had a really good reception share. He has the best reception share. Really, really good pass catcher. It was said at the combine he was doing some wide receiver drills. Dylan Laube was. He's like a 5'11", 206 kind of build, but he can definitely catch a lot of passes, and obviously that's intriguing from a fantasy perspective.
So is he more slightly bigger Darren Sproles or just Lynn Bowden?
I'd say he's more slightly bigger Danny Woodhead.
Oh, okay.
would be
now you
more
have my interest.
Yeah, like he's legit. I mean, like the issue is that you always he's older. He's already 24, which is a problem.
Jesus.
And then yeah, right. And so you're probably only going to see him with like a rookie contract unless he can receiving backs can stay around for a little bit longer time. But yeah, I mean, like I think that he's a fun prospect at the very least. And then lastly, I'll go to Isaac Arendo, who had the best speed score in this class. Speed score just being weight adjusted 40 time. His production profile was not very strong. He stayed in college. He's a little bit older. He's in his 20. He's like 23.5 or something, 23 and a half or something like that. But his top comp was Isaiah Pacheco. And I really liked Isaiah Pacheco coming out more than the market. Humble brag. But I don't think Garendo is as good as Pacheco was as a prospect. Pacheco was early 22s from an age perspective. He had a slightly better breakout score than Garendo had. Garendo didn't even break out, actually, because he just didn't really get his production until really late in college. But sometimes athleticism at running back, that's enough. And if you're not spending, from a cost, from an acquisition standpoint, draft capital in your underdog drafts or your rookie drafts, wherever, if you're not spending a lot, it's fine to invest in like a trait, right? And that trait being, He's athletic. He's got this crazy speed score. Whereas back in the day, when Christine Michael went in like the second round of the NFL draft and he had no production profile, it was literally just like, this is an athlete. You shouldn't invest in that because it's more costly to do that. It's not going to be costly for Isaac Guerendo.
Is Kristen Michael the worst fantasy player of all time based on how much people invested in him?
One of them. And it's always fun whenever I like update my models and like go back and look at, because I'm testing it based on history and stuff and historical outputs. And it's always nice going back and seeing that the model hated Christine Michael every time.
I think the fact
very,
that we always thought his name was Christine for a while, that really enhanced him in a weird way. They're like, oh, what a definitive name.
Yeah, he was a very, very tilting prospect to many.
Yeah. I mean, not only that, he was, like every time that anything would happen, it's like, oh my God, he just signed with the Seahawks. He's their 8th running back now. It's like, got to go pick him up because, give him a chance. He's going to be out there and he's going to be great. Just never happened.
Yeah. And like the difference between like him and like Josh Gordon, because everyone would get excited about Josh Gordon too when he would like sign with different teams. But Josh Gordon, But Josh Gordon proved that he was really good at one. Like he had one of the best wide receiver seasons we've ever seen at one point. Christian Michael literally has never done anything.
Yeah, poor guy. Of the remaining free agents that are out there right now, like I'm just looking at a list, like Zeke, Donta Foreman, J.K. Dobbins, obviously Mike Williams is signed now, Renfro, Beckham, Michael Thomas, which just, I would have thought there would have been more buzz around Michael Thomas. I guess maybe he got hurt to the point of no return, that another year back off the injury, maybe he could do something for someone. And Michael Gallup is still out there. It's not, it's slim pickings.
Tyler Boyd's still out there. I think Boyd's probably the most, I wouldn't be surprised if Boyd actually signs in Pittsburgh because he's from Pittsburgh, went to Pitt, and they have a need at slot. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going there.
How much do you think he would command on the market? I guess not much if no one signed him yet.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I know the Steelers were interested at one point. I think the Chiefs might have been interested at one point too, but I think with the Hollywood Brown signing, they might not be as, I know they don't play similar positions, but like, they might not want to invest again at wide receiver. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think he's going to command a lot. No, I mean, he's an older slot guy. He's not a versatile wide receiver. There's no reason for him to really command a ton.
More likely, fantasy-wise. I mean, you could probably apply this to real life too, as it pertains to Hollywood Brown in Kansas City. Top 20 wide receiver in fantasy or guy you cut after week 2?
Probably guy you cut after week 2. But I actually think that he's not, like, my projections still have him as like a low end wide receiver 3. I just think top 20, it's just so competitive, man. Like there's just so many good wideouts out there. Week 2 is probably premature. Can we say like week 5?
Yeah, sure. We
yeah, like week 5. Week 5.
It feels like he's either going to be really good or really bad. Like that's the profile
probably.
of everyone the Chiefs bring in. It's like, oh my God, this guy fits perfectly, or he's dog shit.
Well, part of the problem is I think they're still going to draft a wide receiver. Like if they use a day 1, day 2 pick on a wide receiver, that wide receiver in this class could be pretty decent. And all of a sudden you have a decent, 3 wideouts that you could, like Rashee Rice can play the slot, can do his yak thing that he does. He's really good with the ball in his hands. Marquise Brown, a really good compliment to that, stretching it. But I think they still kind of need a possession type guy. Like like Rashee Rice is very, very good, and I'm excited about him. And I think that you can still even take him in like the late second round of underdog drafts, because of the association with Patrick Mahomes, the offense he's in, all that kind of stuff. But they still could hypothetically use like a legit like X on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they tried this last year with drafting Rice and Justin Ross, and then bringing all these guys in. Like, whatever happened to Ross? Didn't he have off the field stuff?
Yeah, he had injuries. The reason he wasn't like highly touted out of school a couple of years ago is because he had that injury, and it just like he never was the same. And then he tried to come back, he just wasn't the same. But he was like at one point, like if you look at his age adjusted production, some of the best age adjusted production you're going to find from a college wide receiver.
Do you think it would be crazy? Like after Brock Bowers, who's the next best tight end
in this class?
Yeah.
A lot of people say Jatavian Sanders from Texas. I'm going to say Theo Johnson is the most intriguing because he's just an athletic freak. He's a typical Penn State, tested really well guy. Penn State has all these freak athletes. I mean, they had like Saquon and Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson, just these guys who can test very, very well. But Theo Johnson in my model, my tight end model, which is kind of fresh. I don't publish a tight end model the same way that I do with the wide receiver and running back one. But Theo Johnson's the tight end 2 right now. And then Jaheim Bell is the tight end 3, but he's undersized. He's kind of like a Brevin Jordan move tight end. And then at 4, I have Jatavian Sanders, but I think the 3 of them are like really, really clumped together, and I'll let draft capital and landing spot kind of dictate the way that I would rank them. But Theo Johnson's kind of interesting. He's kind of like when Jelani Woods was coming out, remember how his athletic profile was just like out of control. He's just this monster of a human being. Hasn't worked out for him, but part of that I think is that the Colts just rotate their tight ends a lot. So if Theo Johnson finds the right spot, I mean, he could wreak some havoc.
Yeah, where do you think that these guys end up going? Are they second round picks? Are they third round picks? Like, did people talk themselves into one of them and like all of a sudden, like, hey, surprise, round 1, pick number 29? Because I'm just thinking about the Chiefs out loud. That if there's maybe it is a deep wide receiver class and they do take one of these guys to end up being a compliment. But if you're the Chiefs, you got to start looking for life after Travis Kelce. And if you can find someone now to bring him in and at least maybe even just learn for a year being the backup, and you do have this high ceiling athletic profile for one of them.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the craziest thing to do.
No, I don't think it's crazy either. I mean, Sanders is probably going to go, and right now NFL Mock Draft Database, which is a great resource for like finding projected. That's what I use for projected draft capital in my model pre-draft, because draft capital is an input for these guys. But Jatavian Sanders is 55th overall from a projected draft capital standpoint. So he could go round 2 very easily. I think he'll slip a little bit more than that because he didn't have the best combine in the world. You have Cade Stover out of Ohio State, who would be next, and then Theo Johnson around 100. So you might see, let's say 2 to 3 day 2 tight ends. But there's not going to be another day 1 tight end. It's just going to be Brock Bowers.
So what if I read this statement to you? How would you react? That Caleb Williams should pull an Eli Manning and tell the Chicago Bears that I ain't coming.
Is this an RG3 related tweet?
It is. It's actually, it's not only, that's the headline of the tweet, which goes to a video where he's even madder about it in the video. And then I just scroll down just a little bit here underneath. What is this? Oh, JJ Zachariason. This is like saying CJ Stroud should have forced his way out of Houston because of what they did to David Carr 25 years ago. No, JJ. It's not even remotely close, apparently.
Yeah, RG3 doesn't like me.
No,
he didn't block
big
me though.
shocker.
So props to him for not blocking me. No, look, I think it's I would say this to his face. I think it's a lazy take. Like it's a clickbaity take. We know that it's a clickbaity take. And he sends this message out. He makes a video saying how Caleb Williams shouldn't go to Chicago because the infrastructure is not really there from like a coaching standpoint and a GM, that Ryan Poles might lose his job and Matt Eberflus might lose his job, which might be true. We don't know that for sure. But to me, what that's ignoring, and then, you can cite what Chicago has done historically with quarterbacks, what does that matter? Well, because GMs got Rex Grossman wrong, they're going to be wrong about Caleb Williams. It's literally irrelevant. That's why I said that's like saying that CJ Stroud shouldn't have gone to Houston because of what they did to David Carr, because it's not relevant. It's a completely different regime. The players in place are completely different than what Justin Fields used and had. And so I think the Bears learned their lesson, which is why they went out and traded for Keenan Allen last week. They realize that they want to have a good infrastructure in place for the rookie quarterback that they're drafting. So yeah, it's silliness. I mean, it's just you could argue, Pat, that Caleb Williams is walking into not a volatile situation, but arguably the best situation a rookie quarterback has ever walked into. You could sit here and say oh, Brock Purdy, but Brock Purdy wasn't meant to be the starter in that offense or Trey Lance even whenever they drafted Trey Lance. You could say
Trey Lance walked into that situation.
Yeah, right. But I think that Trey Lance is quite literally the only other Trey Lance is probably better because the coaching was there and such, but you could very easily, let's just say top 3 of the last 2 decades. This is probably the best situation. Top 3 wise.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, because when teams are drafting their quarterbacks early, they're not set up well. There's a reason they're drafting their quarterbacks early. The fact that you have DJ Moore, you have a decent offensive line, you have now Keenan Allen, you have Cole Kmet, you have this infrastructure, a good run game, this infrastructure in place, that needs to go a decent, that goes a long way.
Mayo experience. Experience.